do it this way. I want to start by thanking you, Dahlia, for coming to talk to Public Seminar today and congratulate you on another season of covering the court in the Trump administration.
That doesn't sound like congratulations. It sounds like deep sympathy. Like I feel like it should be like a black card with like gold, like I'm sorry for your loss. But yeah. I will take your thank you and I will congratulate you on your book.
Thank you very much. Dahlia, the big story today is that Associate Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is no longer in cancer remission. And every time we get a health alert from her, it strikes fear into the hearts of women everywhere and Constitution watchers everywhere. I sometimes think that when we are relying on the continuing good health of a woman who is almost 90 to save our democracy, that democracy might already be lost. And I guess my question is, do we rely too much on the court and too little on achieving the kind of political consensus that could produce successful legislation?
Well, it's hard to believe that there could be successful legislation. In other words, right. It's a tough thing to say we should invest our energy in this thing that can't seemingly be done. But I don't dispute your premise, which is I think progressives have a sort of whole host of very, very magical thoughts about the court and how it works. And part of that is I think we just sort of hit the snooze button after the Warren Court and continued to believe that the court was essentially a progressive institution and didn't pay enough attention to what was a really systematic, well-funded, dark money effort to change not just the Supreme Court, but all the courts in ways that now suddenly we wake up and we say, what? You know, everything depends on Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Actually not. She's one of 4 progressives now. In 2016, we could have had a conversation about why progressives didn't care about the court when we had Ginsburg, Breyer, and Kennedy all either 80 or about to turn 80, and a vacancy that had been held open by Mitch McConnell. And still we didn't show up to vote on the court.
Let me just ask you this. If when Merrick Garland was nominated by Barack Obama, people had gone into the streets the way they're in the streets now for social justice, do you think it would have made a difference?
I think so. I think it would have. I think that what we saw happen, and here's like where my husband says, no, you are already setting yourself on fire, like in, you know, February of 2016, and no one was listening, because I was already feeling that, you know, the failure to give Garland not even just a, you know, up or down vote, but even courtesy meetings, the complete hope on the part of Chuck Grassley, Mitch McConnell, that progressives just would not care, was so vindicated. And to me, Claire, I think that, you know, the best evidence of that is that while in April, May, June, while it was still a little bit embarrassing for Mitch McConnell to say, hey, we're just not giving him a vote because we don't have to. By September, October, November of 2016, you had Ted Cruz, John McCain, Mitch McConnell openly campaigning on the proposition that we stole that seat. And if Hillary Clinton is elected president, we will keep that seat vacant for 4 or 8 more years. That is our pledge to you. Right. So you have one side that is actually saying, we are going to do this lawless thing. And every single Democrat that I know of running for Senate said nothing.
Right.
And so the asymmetry of, you know, it's not even that progressives weren't on the street. It's that at the highest levels, there was no messaging about the fact that they've stolen a seat. There are 3 octogenarians, and this court is going to be unrecognizable to you in 2 years. Just silence. So I almost want to say, I don't know if they had to be on the street, but they had to care.
I want to stick with Justice Ginsburg just for a second. You know, we would all regret her passing for so many reasons. She's a historic figure. She's an amazing person. She seems to be a brilliant jurist, even at 87. And what could the Democrats do? Because, I mean, were the worst to happen, we imagine that Mitch McConnell would say, Merrick Garland, who? We're moving ahead, you know? So what could the Democrats do in that situation?
Not much at this point, and I should be clear that Mitch McConnell's already said that whatever that quote unquote Biden rule from 2016 that precluded Obama from seating a nominee in the last year of his presidency is off the table now. And he has some theory because this is because, you know, Republicans control the Senate, so it's different, you know, that was inapposite, blah, blah, blah. But what he's just really saying is the same thing he said after Merrick Garland, which is because we can. And I would add, and this goes back to that enthusiasm gap you started with, that would be so great for Donald Trump. Like the single best thing that could happen to Donald Trump's otherwise utterly faltering presidency would to be have an Amy Coney Barrett, you know, a Justin Walker, like a big
Bill Barr,
you know, kind of confirmation hearing this summer. It would be, oh my God, my blood just ran cold when you said Bill Barr. He's too old. I think that's probably they have to be like 17 or 18 in order to meet the McConnell standard. But I do think that would be fantastic because it will rally the base. I think the base will say we had huge losses on abortion, on Title VII, on DACA, on immigration. All those losses can only be fixed if we have 6 and not 5 conservatives on the Supreme Court. And so I think in some sense it would be a double catastrophe. There's not much structurally that can be done. We could go back in time and vote, you know, for Hillary Clinton in 2016, but absent that, I don't know that there's a fix. I think that we're looking at, again, conversations about very fundamental structural court reform.
Right. So we mentioned a couple of names. I just want to finish off this piece of the conversation. I said Bill Barr, you nearly fainted. You said Amy Coney Barrett. How afraid should we be? Who's up? Who's on the Trump list?
I mean, I think she's definitely on the short list, and I think at least some of the scuttlebutt around why she was moved behind Brett Kavanaugh, because I think she was at the top of the short list, I think, for that seat, is that he wanted to reserve a woman for a woman. In other words, if it were Ginsburg, I think she then very, very, very definitively becomes the top choice. And you know, we can talk about what it meant to substitute Clarence Thomas for Thurgood Marshall. Like, I think there's something really pernicious in there. But I would say she raises a whole host of questions that Democrats are utterly unprepared to talk about. And that is, she has made a career of being very, very open about the fact that her religion sort of inflects in her jurisprudence. She is, you know, wildly anti-choice, wildly anti a whole bunch of things. And the inability of Democrats in the Senate to find a sort of constitutional construct to say, like, if you are against surrogacy and you're against contraception, how do you judge these cases? And there's just, I can't tell you, like, the amount of hush around this from the left has just been a disaster.
Right. Well, okay, I was going to move to something else, but I just want to follow this up for a second. To what extent should feminism take responsibility for creating the parameters of this discourse? And to what extent has perhaps official feminism, the feminist establishment, perhaps dropped the ball since it originally accomplished things like Roe v. Wade and you know, laws against sexual assaults and so on and so forth? Is there some kind of introspection that we should be engaging in as feminists?
That's an amazing question. And somehow I don't know that I've thought about it as hard as I should. I will say that I think contemporary feminism has absolutely, I think this is implicit in what you're asking, seeded the ground of, we're going to just let the religious arguments all be on one side, and we're going to make sort of health arguments on the other. And as a consequence, I think you're absolutely right that the ability to say things like, we're going to have a heartbeat ban regardless of whether, you know, that's medically provable. We're going to have these fetal pain exemptions. We're going to say, as the Little Sisters did in the case this year, you know, we don't really care what science says. We're going to say that, you know, life begins at conception or implantation, and therefore the IUD and Ella are abortifacients. I mean, every one of those religious claims is not just largely seeded by the feminist movement, who says, well, but science, and there's no conversation to be had. But I would go so far as to say a lot of these claims, when they were first litigated, even by the Obama administration and in Hobby Lobby, the Justice Department took the position that, look, who knows, you know, when contraception begins. If you say it starts, you know, with the morning after pill, we're going to concede that. And I think that there's not just the feminist movement, but a kind of failure to say, if we are going to have a legal regime constructed on purely religious beliefs that are actually not borne out by science at all, and we concede all that ground, which is, I think, what you're asking,
yes,
then you're going to lose. And in some sense, you know, the Little Sisters case this year is sort of the inevitable consequence of, if you just say that, you know, by filling out a form that says, I decline to provide contraception to my workers, and by checking this box, I want the insurer to do it, and that is causing an abortion.
Right.
That's all stuff that the Obama administration conceded. So I think you're right, and I don't have a sort of formal diagnostic answer, because I don't know how in a constitutional democracy you solve those fights.
Right. So let's shift to talk about the Roberts Court more generally, which has been a kind of object of fascination this term, as John Roberts has, you know, been a figure to watch. And in a story you wrote at the end of June, you debunked the notion that John Roberts had become a liberal, or, as you said, even a moderate centrist. But you do seem to see him as a man in motion to somewhere. Can you talk to us about that?
That is the $40,000 question. You know, and I did an event last night, a sort of term wrap up, where I was sort of like, Adam Liptak at the Times and I were sort of going back and forth about this. And I think I don't have a very satisfying answer. I will say, I think it's a huge, huge error to say, as Adam did, I think in his term wrap up, that John Roberts is drifting to the left. And I think when I said to you, this conversation about court reform is off the table, in part it's because I think Democrats have been so happy to say, look, we fixed John Roberts. He's David Souter now. Yeah. And I think that John Roberts is not David Souter. He is not even Anthony Kennedy. John Roberts is a lifelong movement conservative who, on almost every issue until this term, was not in play. And I think this term, in a few really crucial cases and in very savvy ways, threw in with the left wing of the court, I would say, in ways that are possibly consequential, but maybe not. Time will tell. And in some cases, and I'm thinking of the financial cases, looked like huge victories for the left and in fact served to run out the clock. And so I think in that piece I said, he's surfing time in a way that's really interesting. He knows he has 20 more years on the court. He knows Trumpism may be over in November or January. He has always played a long game, and things that appear to be huge wins. And then, as I said, then you get this like, oh, I'll hit the snooze button again. I guess the court isn't really a thing to worry about. I'll go back to worrying about all the other things that really are. He just surfs that.
So I want to shift to my last topic here, Dahlia, which is a terrific article you wrote in October.
Good. Don't ask me about something I wrote more than a week ago. Okay.
Well, I'll describe it and you'll remember it. It's before we were all confined to our homes, and you wrote a powerful essay about how deeply you had been affected by the Kavanaugh hearings. And that the kind of gloves off battle that ensued actually changed your relationship to your work, and you weren't able to actually go back to the Supreme Court. So I have a question about that. Your portfolio is much broader than the court now. Obviously, nobody's going to the Supreme Court now. But did you return at some point? You haven't. And would you? And under what conditions would you be able to return to the court?
Only one other person has asked me about this, Claire, and they were much less gentle than you. They said, have you stopped being a hypocrite? So I thank you for your gentle questioning. The only time I've returned to the court since I wrote that piece was actually in January, just to interview RBG. I got an hour to sit with her, and so but I have not covered a public session. And I did cover the audio when the court in May heard a little more than a dozen cases telephonically. I did cover those because I didn't feel like I was in the room. I don't think I can say with any confidence that I plan to be back in the chamber anytime soon. As you say, I doubt the justices are going to be in the chamber anytime soon. But I think, I guess I would just say, you know, I wrote that piece from a place of just finding the Kavanaugh process so troubling, and so many, particularly women, but also men, so PTSD going from that hearing, Dr. Blasey Ford's unbelievably compelling testimony, his just sort of frothing response, and I think his material misrepresentations, the fact that there was no meaningful investigation, even though one was promised. I mean, I just felt bruised. And I think at the time I kept saying, you know, in a week or two, I'll be able to go in there and just, you know, with my jaunty pen and notepad and write like Justice Kavanaugh said. And I just couldn't get myself there. Right. And which is no slur on the amazing press corps that covers it. I don't mean to say they all just covered for and enabled it. It was just that for me, a lot of the processes that allowed him to evade scrutiny seemed to just snap back into place, and that it was all going to just be okay for him. And I felt that there had been no real reckoning. And so for months and months, I just didn't go back, and I like kept saying I had a cold and like I broke my leg. And at some point my editor was, you know, what is going on? And I just said, I can't be a part of a system that feels like it has done something really profoundly wrong. I understand that's grandiose and it's complicated, but that's how I feel. And then I eventually, rightly or wrongly, I'm not sure, wrote that piece. But the one coda, I mean, I may have told this to you at the time, but the one coda to the story is that after I filed it, I got, I want to say 25 letters from con law professors saying, thank you, that's why I'm not teaching con law anymore. Wow. And that was a punch in the face to me, because I thought, no, you don't get to not teach con law. Like,
please.
The world needs you to be teaching con law. Like, it's not a good thing if the only people who are teaching constitutional law are, you know, the people who thought that hearing was awesome. So it became like a really complicated, I still feel as though I didn't want to give anyone permission to opt out of doing the thing they have to do. Right. But I do feel like these questions about how we enable, how we cover for, how we kind of just say to ourselves, I'm not really a part of this system, so it's okay for me to be in this system. I just think these are the defining questions of the Trump era.